I found a receipt for a diamond necklace. It was tucked in my bookshelf. The date was 3 months ago. I never received this necklace. The paper felt crisp in my hand. I placed it on a packed box. My living room was full of cardboard. Each box held pieces of a shared life. Sunlight came through the bare window. It highlighted dust on empty shelves. The mail slot clicked shut downstairs. The sound was final and metallic. I walked to the front hall. A single envelope lay on the tile. It was thick and official. The return address was a law firm. It was not my lawyer's firm. I knew what this document was. My fingers were calm picking it up. This was the divorce petition. James had filed first. The paper was heavy and expensive. I did not open it immediately. I set it on the kitchen counter. The silent house seemed to hold its breath. I needed air and a task. My eyes fell on my laptop. An email notification glowed on the screen. It was a job inquiry response. The subject line read archival project position. I had applied on a whim last week. The message was from lawyer Maya Chen. She represented the Delaney estate. The offer was for temporary cataloging work. The work would be at a carriage house. It would start the following Monday. I typed a one-sentence acceptance. I hit send before reconsidering. A quiet relief washed over me. It was a small, definite action. It was something just for myself. James would call it a meaningless hobby. That thought made my decision firmer. I closed the laptop with a soft click. The petition still lay on the counter. Monday arrived with a soft, gray sky. I drove to the provided address. The Delaney estate was behind old trees. The main house was grand but closed. My destination was the separate carriage house. It was a stone building with ivy. An elderly man waited by the door. He introduced himself as Arthur Finch. He was the estate's caretaker. Arthur had a kind, weathered face. He said very little. He simply handed me a heavy key. The door opened with a reluctant groan. The air inside was cool and still. It smelled of old paper and beeswax. Sunlight came through high, dusty windows. The room was filled with document boxes. They were stacked on sturdy metal shelves. A single desk and lamp sat in the center. Arthur gave a small nod. Then he left me alone in the quiet. I stood there for a long moment. I absorbed the profound silence. It was a welcoming silence. It held no expectations or disappointments. I placed my bag on the desk. My first task was creating an inventory. I opened the box labeled Ledgers 1981-985. I expected dry financial records. I pulled out the first bound volume. It was leather-worn and soft. I opened it to a random page. The entries were handwritten in precise ink. They were not about money or assets. The first line I read was grant, tuition. It listed a university's name. A student ID number was carefully noted. The amount covered a full semester. The notation said no repayment required. The next entry was grant, medical debt. It was for an unknown family. The amount erased their entire balance. This was a ledger of gifts. It was a secret record of generosity. Catherine Delaney was the philanthropist. She was also the archivist of her own kindness. I turned page after page. Each entry detailed a quiet rescue. Rent, a business loan, a funeral expense. All were anonymized but carefully recorded. The systematic compassion overwhelmed me. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a text from James. "Did you get the papers?" he asked. The words were blunt on the screen. I looked back at the ledger. I saw a grant for a legal fee. It helped someone fight an unfair eviction. The contrast was jarring and clarifying. I did not reply to his text. I placed my phone face down. I continued my work with new focus. The next box was labeled Correspondence 1990s. I hoped for more context. I found a bundle of thank you notes. They were all addressed to CD. The signatures were just first names. "You saved our home," one read. "My daughter can breathe again," said another. A small, folded map slipped from the bundle. It was of my own hometown. A specific street was circled in pencil. A date was written beside it. That date matched my college graduation year. A chill traced my spine. It was surely a coincidence. Many people lived on that street, yet the timing felt strangely precise. Arthur Finch returned with a tea tray. He moved with a quiet grace. He set the cup beside me gently. He glanced at the open ledger. He noted the map on my desk. His expression did not change. He spoke in his soft, gravelly voice. "She believed in keeping records," he said. He meant Catherine Delaney. "She believed context was everything." I asked if he knew about the grants. He gave a slow, single nod. He called them second chances. He said Catherine disliked the spotlight intensely. Public praise made her deeply uncomfortable, so she worked in absolute secrecy. He picked up the empty tray. He paused at the doorway before leaving. "Your Professor Alden spoke highly of you," he said. Then he was gone. Professor Alden was my favorite college mentor. He had died suddenly 5 years ago. I had never mentioned him to Arthur. I had never mentioned him to anyone here. The connection felt like a puzzle piece. It slotted into place with a soft click. I felt observed in a non-threatening way. It felt like being seen for the first time in years. The workday ended too quickly. I locked the carriage house door. The key felt solid in my hand. I drove back to my half-empty home. The divorce petition awaited on the counter. Its presence now felt less imposing. I had a secret of my own now. I had Catherine Delaney's ledger. I finally opened the legal envelope. I read the formal language. It outlined the dissolution of our marriage. It listed assets to be divided. It felt distant and procedural. It was just another document. It held no more power over me. I filed it neatly in a folder. I made a simple dinner for one. I ate it at the quiet kitchen table. My mind kept returning to the ledger. I thought of the student tuition grant. I remembered my own scholarship. It was a last-minute award. It had covered my final year. Professor Alden had nominated me for it. He said it was a private donor fund. I never questioned it further. I had simply been grateful. Now a new question began to form. It was a fragile, shimmering possibility. The next morning, I returned to the archive. I went to the ledger for my graduation year. I searched for any entry with my university's name. I found it on a page near the back. The grant was for the Alden Research Fellowship. The amount was substantial. The notation said, for his promising protege. No name was listed, but Professor Alden only had one protege that year. It was me. The air left my lungs. Catherine Delaney had funded my education. She had chosen me indirectly. I sat down heavily in the chair. I traced the ink with my finger. The handwriting was calm and unwavering. I felt a surge of profound gratitude. It was mixed with deep confusion. Why would she do this? Why would she care? My phone rang. It was James. His voice was strained on the line. He asked if I had retained a lawyer. He said we needed to move quickly. He called the archive job a distraction. He said it was beneath my potential. His words were familiar and draining. I looked at the ledger entry. I looked at the proof of belief. "I am busy, James," I said quietly. My voice did not waver. "We can talk next week." I ended the call. I had never ended a call with him before. A small power shift occurred in that moment. It was quiet but immensely significant. I placed the phone back in my bag. I returned to the box of correspondence. I needed to understand Catherine Delaney. I found a file labeled Project Phoenix. It contained site surveys and zoning reports. They were for a derelict city neighborhood. It was called The Grove. The documents were at least a decade old. Notes in the margin asked about community needs. They asked about green space and local businesses. This was not a demolition plan. It was a restoration dream. I carefully set the file aside. It felt important. I opened the next box. It was filled with bank statements. They were not for Catherine's personal account. They were for a separate foundation trust. The transactions were large and periodic. Each matched an entry in the ledgers. The system was elegant and self-sustaining. Her wealth was a tool. It was not an ornament. This was a revelation to me. I had always seen money as conflict. For James, it was a scorecard. For Catherine, it was a quiet lever. It changed lives without fanfare. The afternoon light began to fade. Arthur came to turn on the lamps. He saw the Project Phoenix file on my desk. He paused. "She never got to start that one," he murmured. There was regret in his voice. "The timing was never right." He said legal complications arose. He did not elaborate further. He simply adjusted the lamp's light. Then he left me with the unfinished dream. I closed the file with new respect. This was more than an archival job. I was piecing together a legacy someone tried to hide. I packed my things to leave. I noticed a slender envelope. It was tucked into the lid of the ledger box. I had missed it before. My name was written on the front. Allura Vance. The handwriting was the same precise script. It was from Cuthbertson Dullina herself. The envelope was sealed. An instruction was written below my name. "Open after the first ledger is complete." I had not completed the first ledger. I was only partway through. The directive was clear. I felt a thrill of anticipation. This was a direct conversation. It was a message across time. I placed the envelope in my bag. I would honor her instructions. I drove home through the gathering dusk. The sealed envelope lay on the passenger seat. It felt like a quiet companion. My home felt different when I entered. It felt less like an ending. It felt more like a corridor. I was passing through to something new. I made tea and sat in the living room. I did not turn on the television. I listened to the quiet instead. My phone buzzed with a new email. It was from my own lawyer. She had received James's petition. She attached a draft of our response. She also included a financial disclosure form. James had filed his assets. I needed to file mine. The form asked for all sources of income. I listed my old job. Then I added the Dullina archive position. The salary was modest but real. It was my first independent income in years. That felt significant. I signed the document electronically. I sent it back to my lawyer. It was another small, definite action. I was building a paper trail of my own. It was not a ledger of grants. It was a ledger of reemergence. I finished my tea. I looked at the sealed envelope on the table. The mystery was a gentle pressure. It was not an anxiety. It was a purpose. I would continue the work tomorrow. I would follow Cuthbertson's trail. I went to bed early. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. The morning was bright and clear. I returned to the carriage house archive. Arthur Finch was pruning roses outside. He gave me a silent nod. I unlocked the heavy door with my key. The familiar scent of paper welcomed me. I went straight to the ledger box. I needed to finish the first volume. Cuthbertson's envelope waited in my bag. I worked through the pages methodically. Each entry was a crisis averted. I saw a pattern in her choices. She favored nurses, teachers, and small farmers. She supported people after natural disasters. She never funded flashy startups. Her grants were personal and specific. They filled gaps other systems missed. The last page was a summary. It totaled the year's silent giving. The number was breathtaking in its generosity. I closed the leather cover gently. I had completed the first ledger. My heart beat a little faster. I retrieved the sealed envelope from my bag. I used a letter opener on the desk. The paper inside was thick and creamy. The handwriting was the same. It read, "Find the baker on Laurel Street." That was the entire message. It was a puzzle, not an explanation. I sat back, considering the clue. Laurel Street was in the city. It was not a place I frequented. I opened my laptop to search. I typed Laurel Street Bakery into a search engine. Several results appeared instantly. One was called The Rising Bread. Its tagline mentioned a second chance hearing policy. I felt a jolt of recognition. I cross-referenced the ledger's geographic notes. I found an entry from 15 years prior. It was for Business Seed Capital Food Services. The recipient's code matched the bakery's district. This was a second chance recipient. Cuthbertson wanted me to see the result. She wanted me to see a living outcome. I decided to go there for lunch. The drive into the city was easy. The bakery was in a revitalized neighborhood. Its windows were warm and inviting. The smell of fresh bread was wonderful. I bought a simple sandwich and coffee. I took a seat at a small table. I observed the baker behind the counter. He was a man in his 50s. He moved with efficient, happy energy. He joked easily with his employees. The shop was busy and thriving. This was a success story. I finished my meal and approached the counter. I asked if he had a moment. He smiled and said he always had time. I showed him a photograph of the ledger entry. I had redacted the financial amount. I asked if he recognized the grant code. His smile faded into something more profound. He asked me to step into the back office. The room was small and flower-dusted. He looked at the photo for a long time. He confirmed it was his grant. He told me his story quietly. He had been a carpenter. A workplace injury had ruined his back. He could no longer swing a hammer. Baking was his wife's family tradition. They had a recipe but no capital. Banks had rejected his loan applications. Then a lawyer, Maya Chun, had contacted him. The offer had no strings attached. It was a gift to start his business. The only request was periodic anonymous updates. He sent them for 10 years faithfully. He never met the benefactor. He only knew the name CD. He said the gift saved his family. It preserved his dignity. He began to tear up. He quickly composed himself. He asked why I wanted to know. I said I was cataloging CD's legacy. I said her name was Cuthbertpendulina. He repeated the name slowly. He said he would remember it now. He insisted I take a loaf of bread. He refused any payment. I returned to my car with the warm loaf. The tangible result was overwhelming. Cuthbert's money was not just numbers. It was this man's smile. It was the smell of his bakery. It was a dozen jobs he created. I drove back to the archive deeply moved. Arthur was waiting inside for me. He was not alone. A woman in a sleek suit stood with him. She had an air of sharp intelligence. She introduced herself as Maya Chun. She was Cuthbert's estate lawyer. Her demeanor was cool and assessing. She asked why I was accessing personal files. She referenced the ledger and the correspondence. She said those were not part of the cataloging scope. Her tone was not hostile, but firm. It was a clear power shift. I felt like an intruder for a moment. I explained about the envelope and the instruction. I showed her the note about the baker. Her expression shifted minutely. The sharpness softened into resignation. She let out a slow breath. She confirmed the baker's story was true. Then she revealed a critical fact. Cuthbert's will specifically named me for this project. I was not chosen at random from a resume pile. Cuthbert's had requested Allura Vance by name. She had given the instruction a year ago. Maya was merely executing the wish. This was a profound contradiction to my assumption. I had stumbled into a designed path. I asked how Cuthbert knew of me. Maya said it was through Professor Alden. He and Cuthbert were longtime friends. They shared a belief in quiet patronage. Cuthbert had followed my career from afar. She knew about my marriage's troubles. She knew about the impending divorce. Maya relayed this information calmly. It should have felt like a violation. Instead, it felt like being seen. I asked when Cuthbert died. Maya's voice grew quieter. Cuthbert passed 6 months ago. She died alone in her apartment. She had no surviving family. The press ran a brief, cold obituary. It called her a reclusive heiress. It speculated about her wasted fortune. The public knew nothing of the ledgers. I felt a surge of protective anger. Her legacy was being completely misunderstood. Maya handed me a business card. She said to call with any more questions. She warned me the next files were complicated. They involved property and legal fights. Then she left the carriage house. Arthur remained, watching me process. He said Maya was fiercely loyal. She protected Cuthbert's wishes like a dragon. Her initial coldness was just caution. I appreciated his explanation. I turned back to the shelves. I now looked for files on the Grove. I found a large, flat box. It was labeled Property Acquisitions. Inside were deeds and land surveys. They were for multiple plots in the Grove neighborhood. Cuthbert had been buying them for years. The purchases were slow and deliberate. She used different shell companies each time. She clearly wanted to avoid attention. The most recent deed was 5 years old. I spread the maps on the large desk. The plots formed a contiguous block. It was a significant parcel of land. I remembered the Project Phoenix file. This was the land for her dream. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news app. A headline caught my eye. City Council to review Grove development proposals. I opened the article quickly. It mentioned a developer named Strathmore Holdings. They proposed a luxury condominium complex. The rendering showed glossy, tall buildings. It bore no relation to Catherine's community center plans. The article quoted local opposition. It also quoted supporters citing economic growth. A familiar name was in the supporters list. Vance and Partners had provided financial analysis. James's firm was involved. My breath hitched. This was a direct collision of worlds. My husband was helping to erase her dream. I saved the article to my phone. This was a new document. It was a new conflict. I needed to understand Strathmore Holdings. I began a new search on my laptop. The company had a complex corporate structure. Its ultimate owner was not clear. It had a history of aggressive development. It often bought out distressed properties. The Grove plots were mostly distressed. Except for Catherine's hidden portfolio. She owned the key piece of the puzzle. Strathmore could not build without her land. They likely did not know she owned it. The shell companies provided excellent camouflage. This was a power shift she engineered from beyond. She had positioned herself as a silent roadblock. I was now the only one who knew. The responsibility felt immense. The afternoon light was fading again. I carefully refiled the property deeds. I took detailed photos of everything first. I needed my own records. I locked the archive and drove home. My mind raced with connections. James's pressure for a fast divorce made new sense. His big client needed a win. The Grove deal was likely that win. My refusal to rush was an obstacle. I felt a grim sense of clarity. I arrived home to another certified letter. This one was from my own lawyer. It contained James's full financial disclosure. I poured a glass of water and sat down. I reviewed the dense pages of assets and liabilities. His income was high, but his debt was higher. Personal guarantees on business loans were listed. His financial position was far shakier than I knew. His anxiety now had a concrete source. He was under tremendous pressure. This document changed my understanding. It was not mere greed driving him. It was fear of collapse. I felt a pang of unexpected pity. It was brief, but it was real. I placed the disclosure with the other papers. I ate a simple dinner alone. I thought about the baker owner's face. I thought about Catherine dying alone. I thought about James's hidden fear. Life was more fragile than it appeared. Everyone was fighting a hidden battle. The ledgers documented those battles. My phone rang. It was my lawyer. She asked if I had seen the disclosure. I confirmed that I had. She said James's counsel was pushing for mediation. They wanted to settle within 2 weeks. She advised against such a rushed timeline. She said we needed proper valuation. I agreed with her completely. I authorized her to delay the process. I told her I needed more time. I did not tell her why. After the call, I felt exhausted but clear. I took a long, hot shower. The steam cleared my mind. I went to bed early again. Sleep came quickly but was filled with dreams. I dreamed of blueprints and bread. I dreamed of ledgers that grew into trees. I woke with a sense of mission. The archive held more answers today. I arrived earlier than usual. Arthur was polishing the door's brass handle. He gave me a kind smile. He said Maya Chen had called him. She approved my full access to all files. The gates were officially open now. This was a significant power shift. I thanked him and went inside. The property box was my first priority. I needed to understand the legal landscape. Beneath the deeds, I found court filings. They were from several years ago. Strathmore Holdings had sued a shell company. It was one of Catherine's purchasing entities. They alleged anti-competitive practices in buying Grove land. The case was dismissed with prejudice. Catherine's legal team had been flawless. Maya Chen's name was on the motion. She had protected the assets completely. The court document was a dry victory. I photographed each page carefully. This was historical armor for the land. It established a precedent of ownership. I filed the documents away with relief. Next, I searched for the Project Phoenix blueprint. I found it in a flat drawer. The architectural rendering was beautiful. It showed a community center with gardens. It had a clinic wing and a childcare space. It was modest but perfectly scaled. Notes in the margin listed local nonprofits. They were potential partners for the space. This was not a billionaire's vanity project. It was a practical, grassroots vision. The contrast to Strathmore's glass towers was absolute. I felt a deep connection to this drawing. Catherine's intent was so clear here. I wanted to protect this specific dream. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. It was a reminder for Sophie's parent-teacher conference. I had almost forgotten it entirely. I packed my things quickly. I promised myself to return after the meeting. The elementary school was bright and noisy. It was a world away from the quiet archive. I met Sophie's teacher, Ms. Lopez. She said Sophie was doing very well academically, but she had noticed a recent quietness. Sophie was drawing pictures of divided houses. She asked careful questions about change. Ms. Lopez was gentle but concerned. She recommended we provide extra reassurance. I thanked her for the observation. I felt a twist of maternal guilt. I had been so focused on papers. I had missed subtle signs in my own daughter. I collected Sophie from her classroom. Her face lit up when she saw me. We went for ice cream at a nearby shop. We sat at a small, sticky table. I asked her about her drawings. She looked at her chocolate scoop. She said she wanted our home to be happy. She said she heard Dad yelling on the phone. She knew it was about money. Her perception was painfully acute. I told her change was sometimes scary. I said both her parents loved her completely. That love would never change. I said we were working on a new way, a way where no one yelled. She seemed to absorb this. Then she asked a surprising question. She asked if we could plant a garden. She said gardens make people happy. Her words echoed Catherine's blueprints exactly. A chill ran down my arms. It felt like a message from the universe. I said a garden was a wonderful idea. We finished our ice cream in a better mood. I drove her to James's apartment for his night. He met us at the curb. His face looked tired and drawn. He hugged Sophie tightly. He gave me a curt nod. There was no conversation between us. I drove back toward the archive. But I did not go there directly. I drove to the Grove neighborhood instead. I needed to see the land with my own eyes. I parked on a side street. I walked with Catherine's map in my hand. The area was a patchwork of neglect and hope. There were boarded-up stores. There was also a vibrant mural on one wall. I found the first plot from the deeds. It was a vacant lot filled with weeds. A chain-link fence surrounded it. A faded "no trespassing" sign hung loosely. I could see the potential underneath the neglect. The lot was sunny and level. It was perfect for a garden. I walked the perimeter slowly. I imagined the community center here. I imagined Sophie's garden in a corner. The vision felt intensely real for a moment. A voice interrupted my reverie. "It's a shame, isn't it?" A woman stood nearby. She had a reporter's notebook in her hand. She introduced herself as Rebecca Sterling. She was a journalist. She said she was doing a story on the neighborhood. She asked what brought me here. I was cautious at first. I said I was interested in local history. She nodded and pointed to the lot. She said a mysterious trust owned it. It had been sitting empty for years. The community wanted to use it for a park. The city claimed their hands were tied. She believed Strathmore Holdings was circling. She was investigating their political connections. Her tone was sharp and passionate. I asked if she knew about other lots. She said several were owned by the same trust. They formed a perfect block for development. She feared a backroom deal was brewing. I considered my next words carefully. I said I might have information about the trust. Her eyes narrowed with interest. I suggested we talk somewhere more private. We agreed to meet at the Daily Grind tomorrow. I left the Grove feeling watched but not threatened. Rebecca's investigation was a new variable. She could be an ally or a complication. I would need to be very careful. I finally returned to the carriage house. Arthur had left a note on the desk. It said, "Maya dropped this for you." A small, secure flash drive sat on the paper. I plugged it into my laptop. It contained a single PDF file. The file was Catherine's most recent will. I scrolled to the specific clause about me. It read, "I appoint Alara Vance as archival executor." It gave me authority to interpret the collection. It allowed me to bring the legacy to light. The legal language was precise and powerful. This document made my role official. It was a transfer of profound trust. I saved a copy to my own computer. I removed the flash drive gently. I felt the weight of duty settle on me. It was a heavy but welcome weight. I opened a new box labeled Personal Effects. It contained non-paper items. There was a simple silver key on a ring. A tag was attached with the word breath. I remembered the envelope's instruction. It had said the same word, breathe. This was likely a safe deposit key. There was also a faded photograph. It showed a young Catherine Delaney. She stood with my Professor Alden. They were both laughing on a college lawn. The connection was now visually confirmed. They looked happy and full of ideas. I turned the photo over. A date was written on the back. It was from over 30 years ago. A friendship had lasted decades. I placed the key and photo in my bag. I would visit the bank tomorrow. The light was almost gone from the windows. I decided to do one more search. I looked for any file on Strathmore or Vance and Partners. I found nothing in the paper records, but I remembered the encrypted digital ledger. Maya had mentioned it in passing. I sent her a brief, polite email. I asked about the digital files. Her reply came within minutes. She gave me a password. It was Alden Protégé. The specificity was another quiet shock. I logged into the secure server she directed me to. A single folder appeared. It was labeled Current. Inside were spreadsheet files from the last 3 years. The grants continued even until her death. The recipients were more diverse now. There was a new category, legal defense. Several grants helped people fight eviction. They helped small businesses contest city fines. Catherine was funding resistance to systems. I saw a grant to a community group in the Grove. It was for organizing and outreach. She was funding the opposition to Strathmore. She was playing a deep, long game. The final entry was from 6 months ago. The recipient field said EV, the grant purpose was listed as courage to see the pattern. The amount was a single dollar. The notation clarified its meaning. For clarity and resolve, the final key. I sat perfectly still. EV were my initials, Alara Vance. This entry was for me. The final key was not the bank key. It was the key of understanding. She was paying me in clarity, $1 for the courage to connect the dots. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I had never felt so deliberately seen. My role was now completely clear to me. I was not just an archivist. I was the inheritor of a mission. I closed the laptop slowly. The room was now dark. Only my desk lamp pushed back the shadows. I gathered my things with steady hands. I locked the carriage house door behind me. The night air was cool and refreshing. I drove home with a settled mind. There were no more certified letters waiting. The house was peacefully silent. I made a simple dinner and ate it. I then called my lawyer. I told her I was ready for mediation, but I had specific terms regarding timing. I needed 2 more weeks minimum. She agreed to communicate that boundary firmly. I felt in control of the pace for once. After the call, I examined the silver key. It had a bank name and number stamped on it. I looked up the branch location. It was downtown, not far from the courthouse. I decided to go there first thing in the morning. I took a bath and went to bed early. My sleep was deep and dreamless this time. I woke feeling rested and resolved. The bank was a grand, old building downtown. Marble floors echoed under my shoes. I presented the key to a teller. She directed me to a private manager's office. The manager was a serious woman in a dark suit. She verified my identity meticulously. I showed my driver's license and social security card. She matched them to the box's authorization documents. Catherine had updated them recently. My name was listed as a co-signatory. The manager led me to the vault room. Walls of safe deposit boxes gleamed under bright lights. She used her key and then mine. The long, metal box slid out smoothly. She placed it in a private viewing room. Then she left me alone with Catherine's final physical secrets. I lifted the hinged lid slowly. Inside were no stacks of cash or jewels. There were only more documents. They were neatly organized in folders. The first folder was labeled, "For Alara, start here." I opened it with careful fingers. It contained a short, handwritten letter. The salutation was simply, "My dear." Catherine wrote about seeing herself in me. She saw a woman of quiet observation. She saw a person who undervalued her own strength. Professor Alden had shown her my thesis work. He praised my empathy and precision. Catherine said those were the tools for this task. She apologized for the burden of this puzzle. She hoped it would feel like liberation. Her words were a direct echo of my own feelings. I set the letter aside gently. The next item was a set of property titles. They were the original deeds to the Grove lots. They were not copies, but the definitive master documents. Holding them felt like holding land itself. Underneath was a single sheet of instructions. It was titled Mechanism of Transfer. It outlined how to move the land into a new trust. The trust would be named the Delaney Foundation. The foundation's purpose was to execute Project Phoenix. I was named as the proposed founding director. Maya Chen was named as counsel. David Wright was named as historical advisor. Catherine had planned the team before her death. She had built a framework for us. All we had to do was step into our roles. It was a breathtaking act of faith. The final item in the box was a photograph. It showed the finished community center blueprint. It was signed by the architect. A sticky note was attached to its back. It read, "They will tell you it's not practical. It is. It's essential." I closed the metal box lid. The click was soft but final. I had everything I needed now. The legal roadmap was in my hands. I summoned the bank manager. She helped me reseal the box in the vault. I kept the folder of documents with me. I walked out into the morning sun. The papers in my bag felt weighty and significant. My next stop was the daily grind. Rebecca Sterling was already there. She had 2 coffees waiting. We took a corner table away from others. I decided on a measured level of disclosure. I showed her the property deeds. I did not show Catherine's letter. I explained a philanthropist owned the land. This philanthropist had a community plan. The philanthropist had passed away. I was now representing her interests. Rebecca's eyes widened with professional excitement. She asked for the philanthropist's name. I said I could provide it conditionally. She needed to delay her article for 2 weeks. I needed time to set up the foundation legally. She agreed after a moment of sharp consideration. She wanted the exclusive story, of course. I agreed to that term. Our alliance was formally struck. We shook hands over the coffee cups. It felt like a small, significant pact. I left the cafe and called Maya Chen. I told her about the safe deposit box contents. I said it was time to form the Delaney Foundation. She did not sound surprised. She said she had drafted the papers already. They were waiting for my signature. She asked me to come to her office that afternoon. I agreed and ended the call. I had an hour before the meeting. I drove to the Franklin Historical Society. I needed to find David Wright. The society was in a beautiful old Carnegie Library building. The reading room was hushed and peaceful. A man at the reference desk directed me. David Wright was in the local history stacks. He was a slender man with kind eyes. He wore a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches. I introduced myself as Alara Vance. I mentioned Catherine Delaney's name. His demeanor shifted to one of deep respect. He said Catherine was a brilliant, misunderstood woman. He had advised her on historical preservation. He knew about Project Phoenix in broad terms. He did not know about the ledgers or the full scale. I showed him the blueprint from my bag. His face lit up with scholarly joy. He said this was the work that mattered most. He agreed to join the foundation board immediately. He offered the Historical Society as a meeting space. This was another piece falling into place. I thanked him and left for my meeting with Maya. Her law office was in a modern downtown tower. The conference room had a stunning city view. Maya was all business today. She laid out the foundation incorporation documents. They were dense, but clearly written. I signed where she indicated with a steady hand. Each signature felt like a promise. She filed the documents electronically on the spot. The Delaney Foundation now legally existed. Our next step was to transfer the property titles. That would take a few days, she said. Once complete, we would own the land openly. We would then approach the city council. We would present Project Phoenix as an alternative. Maya warned me Strathmore would fight back. They might make offers or legal threats. We needed to be prepared for pressure. I told her I understood the risks completely. I was ready to face them. I returned home feeling the day's momentum. The energy shifted when I opened my front door. James was sitting in my living room. He had used his old key to enter. His presence was a violation of our new space. He stood up when he saw me. His expression was strained and angry. He demanded to know what I was doing. He said his client was furious about delays. He accused me of conspiring against him. He named Rebecca Sterling the journalist. He said her questions were causing problems. I remained very calm. I asked him to please sit back down. I said we could have a civil conversation. My calmness seemed to unsettle him further. He remained standing. I told him I was executing a client's wishes. My client owned land in the Grove. I was forming a foundation to develop it. I did not mention Catherine's name. I simply stated it as a business matter. His face paled as he connected the dots. He realized I was the obstacle. His own wife was blocking his crucial deal. The contradiction was almost too much for him. He laughed, but it was a hollow sound. He called it a pathetic power play. He said I would lose and look foolish. I did not argue with him. I simply repeated that my path was set. I asked him to return his key to my house. He threw it on the coffee table with a clatter. He left without another word. The door slammed shut behind him. The silence that followed was profound. I picked up the key from the table. I placed it in a kitchen drawer. That chapter was now symbolically closed. I made myself a cup of tea. My hands were not shaking. I felt a strange, solid calm. James's outburst had clarified everything. I was on the right path. Later that evening, Sophie called from James's apartment. She sounded small on the phone. She asked if I was okay. She said Daddy was very quiet and sad. I told her I was perfectly okay. I said sometimes adults feel big feelings. I promised her we would plant a garden soon. That seemed to comfort her. We said our good nights and I love yous. After the call, I opened my laptop. I began drafting a proposal for the city. I outlined the Delaney Foundation's vision. I referenced the community support we would gather. I worked late into the night. The words came easily for the first time in years. I was writing my own ledger entry now. It was not about money. It was about a legacy of care. I saved the document and finally went to bed. The next morning, I went straight to the archive. Arthur had left a new box on my desk. The label said Community Letters, The Grove. It was filled with petitions and wish lists. Local residents had written to Catherine years ago. They asked for a safe playground. They asked for a meeting hall. They asked for a clinic. Catherine had saved every single letter. She had annotated them with possible solutions. This was the true mandate for Project Phoenix. It was built from the community's own words. I spent the day scanning these letters. They were powerful testimony. They would be part of our presentation. As I worked, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. It read, "Cease your foundation work. We can make it worth your while." It was clearly from Strathmore or their agent. I did not reply. I took a screenshot and sent it to Maya. She called me immediately. She said to expect more pressure. She advised me to ignore all communication. She would handle any formal legal threats. I agreed and blocked the unknown number. The threat was a confirmation. We were on the right track. The pressure was escalating, as predicted. I needed a small relief beat. I decided to visit the bakery on Laurel Street again. The baker greeted me like an old friend. I did not mention the threat. I simply bought 2 loaves of bread. I gave one to Arthur when I returned. He accepted it with a gracious nod. He said Maya had called about the text. He said Catherine faced worse in her time. She never backed down from a righteous fight. His words were a simple comfort. I finished my workday with renewed focus. The property transfer was completed the next day. Maya emailed the confirmation to me. The Delaney Foundation now officially owned the land. This was the major power shift we needed. We could now operate from a position of strength. I called Rebecca Sterling. I gave her Catherine Delaney's name. I authorized her to write her article. I said it could run in 1 week. That gave us time to notify the city council first. Rebecca was thrilled with the exclusive. She promised a respectful, impactful story. I then called David Wright. I asked him to prepare a historical brief. He would explain Catherine's family's deep city ties. This would counter the reclusive heiress narrative. Everything was moving forward in unison. I felt like a conductor of a quiet orchestra. Each person played their part perfectly. That night, I allowed myself to feel proud, not of the outcome, which was still uncertain, but of the process. I was acting with intention and clarity. I was building something that would outlast my own troubles. I slept a deep, untroubled sleep. The week that followed was a blur of activity. Maya filed the foundation's public notice of intent. This formally announced our development plans for the Grove. The legal notice appeared in the city's business journal. It was a quiet but powerful declaration. Strathmore Holdings could no longer pretend we did not exist. Their silence was ominous. I expected another threat, but none came. Rebecca Sterling's article was almost ready. She sent me a draft for fact-checking. The headline read, "The Secret Benefactor, How Catherine Delaney's Quiet Billions Built a City's Heart." The article was compassionate and thorough. It wove together the ledger entries and the Grove plan. It quoted the baker anonymously. It changed the narrative completely. Rebecca planned to publish it in 2 days. I shared the draft with Maya and David. They both approved its accuracy and tone. The final step was our presentation to the city council. We secured a slot for the next planning committee meeting. Maya would handle the legal and financial specifics. David would provide historical context. My role was to present the human vision. I would show Catherine's ledgers and the community letters. I practiced my remarks in the empty carriage house. Arthur listened patiently from a corner chair. He offered small suggestions for clarity. His presence was a steadying comfort. The day before the presentation, James called my lawyer. He requested a pause in the divorce mediation. He cited unforeseen professional complications. My lawyer relayed this with a note of curiosity. I knew the complication was the foundation's notice. Strathmore was likely pressuring him to fix the problem. His request for a pause was a strategic retreat. I agreed to the pause without hesitation. It gave me more space to focus. That evening, Sophie came home with a drawing. It was a detailed picture of a community garden. She had drawn little figures holding hands around flowers. One figure had my hair color. One had James's. A smaller figure was in the middle. Above it, she wrote "The Happy Garden." I felt my throat tighten with emotion. I framed the drawing immediately. I placed it on my bedside table. It was my reminder of the true goal, not winning a fight but building a future. The morning of the council meeting arrived. I dressed in a simple, professional suit. I packed my presentation materials carefully. The ledger volume, the community letters, Sophie's drawing. I also packed the original blueprint. Maya, David, and I met outside City Hall. Rebecca Sterling was there as an observer. She gave me an encouraging nod. We walked into the building together. The planning committee room was formal and intimidating. A long dais sat at the front for council members. The public seating area was about half full. I saw several faces from the Grove neighborhood. I saw the baker from Laurel Street. He gave me a subtle thumbs up. I did not see anyone from Strathmore Holdings. I did not see James. We took our seats at the presenter's table. The committee chair called our item number. Maya stood first to introduce our application. She was poised and legally impeccable. She outlined the foundation's ownership and nonprofit status. She submitted the property deeds for the record. The council members accepted them without comment. David Wright spoke next. He connected the Delaney family history to the city's growth. He spoke of legacy versus liquidation. His words were academic but filled with quiet passion. He submitted his historical brief as supporting documentation. Then it was my turn. I stood and faced the committee. My heart was beating steadily, not racing. I began by showing Sophie's drawing. I explained it was a child's vision of community. I then held up Catherine Delaney's ledger. I explained its purpose as a record of second chances. I read 2 anonymous entries aloud. The room fell into a deep, respectful silence. I then presented the bundle of community letters. I explained these were the real blueprints. Project Phoenix was a response to direct pleas. Finally, I unrolled the architect's rendering. I described the community center, the clinic, the gardens. I spoke of partnerships with local nonprofits. I spoke of creating a place, not just a building. I kept my remarks under 5 minutes. I sat down. The committee chair thanked us. Then he opened the floor for public comment. The baker was the first to stand. He told his story of Catherine's second chance. He described how his business now employed 12 people. He spoke about the dignity of that silent gift. His voice cracked with genuine emotion. Several council members leaned forward, listening. A woman from the Grove neighborhood spoke next. She was a teacher at the local school. She talked about the need for a safe after-school space. She talked about children with nowhere to go. Her words were practical and powerful. Other residents stood to express their support. The momentum in the room was visibly shifting. It was organic and real. The committee chair then asked if there was opposition. A man in a sleek suit stood up. He was a lawyer representing Strathmore Holdings. He argued our plan was economically unviable. He said luxury housing generated more tax revenue. He submitted a glossy, competing proposal. The council accepted it without reaction. He then made a surprising announcement. Strathmore Holdings was withdrawing their current proposal. They were submitting a new, revised plan next month. It was a clear tactical delay. They wanted time to regroup and counter our move. The lawyer sat down. The power shift was subtle but clear. They were retreating to fight another day, but today they had no substantive counterargument. Our presentation was the only complete vision in the room. The committee chair called for a brief recess. The council would deliberate and then vote on our preliminary approval. The 20-minute wait felt like an eternity. Maya, David, and I did not speak much. We simply waited together. Rebecca came over and squeezed my shoulder. She said the story would run tomorrow regardless. The committee members filed back into the room. The chairperson cleared his throat. He said the proposal had strong community merit. He commended the foundation's philanthropic approach. The committee voted unanimously to grant preliminary approval. We could now proceed with detailed architectural plans and zoning applications. The room broke into soft applause. We had cleared the first major hurdle. I felt a wave of relief so profound it was dizzying. We exited City Hall into the afternoon sun. The baker hugged me quickly. He said Catherine would be proud. I believed him. Maya had to return to her office. David went back to the Historical Society. I was left standing on the steps alone. Rebecca joined me, notebook in hand. She asked how it felt. I said it felt like the beginning of real work. She smiled and said her article would help. It would build public support for the next phase. We parted ways and I drove to the archive. I needed to tell Arthur the news. He was waiting as if he already knew. He simply said, "Well done." He had prepared a small pot of tea for us. We sat in the carriage house and drank it. The quiet felt earned and peaceful. That evening, James called me directly. His tone was different. It was drained of its former anger. He asked if we could talk in person. I agreed to meet him at a neutral park the next day. I slept deeply again without any dreams at all. The park was sunny and filled with families. James arrived looking tired but composed. We sat on a bench away from the playground. He started by congratulating me on the council vote. He had seen the public meeting agenda. His voice held no bitterness, only exhaustion. Then he told me the consequence. Strathmore Holdings had terminated their contract with his firm. They blamed his failure to manage the local opposition. His biggest client was gone. The loss would trigger layoffs at his company. His professional reputation was damaged. He was facing the financial fear he had long dreaded. He spoke without looking at me. He stared at his hands in his lap. I listened without interrupting. I felt no schadenfreude, only a sad understanding. His ambition had been a cage. Now the door was broken open. He said he was resigning from the firm. He was going to take some time to figure things out. He had already contacted a therapist. He said he needed to get his own house in order. The metaphor was unintentional but apt. Then he spoke about Sophie. He said he wanted a cooperative co-parenting relationship. He apologized for his pressure during the divorce. He said it came from a place of panic. I accepted his apology quietly. I said I also wanted peace for our daughter. We agreed to move forward with mediation calmly. We would use a single, neutral financial advisor. We sat in silence for a few minutes. It was not a comfortable silence, but it was not hostile. It was the silence of two people acknowledging a shared wreckage. We then stood and parted ways with a nod. It was the most civil interaction we had in months. It felt like a true relief wave after the escalation. I drove home feeling a strange emptiness. It was the emptiness after a storm passes. The landscape is changed, but the air is clear. When I got home, Rebecca's article was live online. It was the lead story on the city news site. The comments were overwhelmingly positive. People were inspired by Catherine's story. They were excited about the community center. The narrative had fully turned. My phone began to buzz with messages. There were emails from potential nonprofit partners. There were notes from old colleagues offering congratulations. There was a message from Professor Alden's widow. She had seen the article and recognized my name. She invited me to lunch soon. I replied to each message with brief thanks. I could not process them all at once. I turned off my phone and made dinner. I ate while looking at Sophie's garden drawing. The future felt uncertain, but purposefully so. I was no longer drifting. I was building. Later, I turned my phone back on. One last email had come in. It was from the city clerk's office. It was the formal, written notice of the council's preliminary approval. I printed the document and filed it in my growing project folder. It was another piece of official paper. It held the weight of a new beginning. That night, I dreamed of Catherine Delaney. She was standing in the vacant lot in the Grove. She was not looking at me. She was looking at the empty space with a smile. Then she simply faded into the sunlight. I woke feeling not haunted, but accompanied. The work was mine to do now, but I was not alone. Spring returned with a gentle insistence. The third year of the Delaney Community Center began. It was now an unquestioned part of the city's fabric. Lena managed a full calendar of programs and events. The Foundation's pilot program in the neighboring town launched. A small team there began their own documentation of community needs. They called it the Grove Model. The name stuck. It pleased me deeply. The original Grove was thriving. New small businesses opened nearby, spurred by the center's foot traffic. A coffee shop, a bike repair cooperative. The economic ripple was small but real. It was holistic revitalization, just as Catherine envisioned. Arthur's memoirs were finished. He gave me a printed, bound copy. It was titled Tending the Unseen Garden. I read it in one sitting. It was a beautiful, humble chronicle of stewardship. He wrote of the land, the roses, and the quiet woman who owned them. He wrote of the archivist who came later. His description of me was kind and accurate. He called me the translator. I had translated paper into purpose. I cherished the book. I placed it on the archive shelf next to Catherine's first ledger. They were companions now. One day, Maya called an unusual board meeting. It was just the three of us, Maya, David, and me. She had a formal proposal. She suggested we step down from the day-to-day board. We would become a board of advisors. New, younger community leaders would take the governing seats. It was time to pass the baton fully. It was the final, logical step for sustainability. David agreed immediately. He said his historical work was complete. He wanted to write a proper biography of Catherine now. I felt a nervous flutter, then certainty. It was the right thing to do. We voted unanimously to transition our roles. We began a search for new board members. The process was transparent and community-driven. It felt like the Foundation's final exam, and it passed. A new board was elected by summer. It included the baker, the teacher from the forum, and a young urban planner. They were passionate and capable. Our final meeting as the governing board was bittersweet. We reviewed the Foundation's robust financial health. We celebrated the success of the pilot program. We signed the official documents transferring authority. Then we shared a bottle of sparkling cider. Maya, usually so reserved, got emotional. She said Catherine would be thoroughly annoyed by the fuss, but she would be proud of the structure we built. David gave a short, elegant toast about legacy being a verb. I simply said thank you to both of them. Without their expertise and faith, I would have been just a woman with a box of papers. They had helped me build the house for those papers to live in. We parted with promises of monthly advisory lunches. The next chapter was beginning. With my formal responsibilities lessened, I had more time. I returned to an old love. I began to write, not reports or proposals, but narratives. I wrote about the process of discovery. I wrote about the power of quiet observation. I submitted an essay to a literary journal. It was accepted for publication. The editor called it a stunning meditation on archival ethics and human connection. I read the email in disbelief, then quiet joy. Sophie was now in middle school. Her world was expanding beyond the garden, but she still tended her plot every Saturday. It had become a meditation for her, too. She sometimes brought friends who needed a quiet place. The garden was her sanctuary. She was growing up within the legacy she had helped plant. James was doing well in his new, smaller firm. He had found a niche advising nonprofits on their finances. The irony was not lost on either of us. He was using his skills for good. We could joke about it now, lightly. He had a steady girlfriend, a kind librarian. Sophie liked her. I was happy for their stability. It made Sophie's world more secure. My own social life remained quiet but rich. I had friends from the Foundation work. I had my book club. I had peaceful weekends. I was not waiting for anything. I was present. One afternoon, I received a package from Professor Alden's widow, Eleanor. It was a small, flat box. Inside was Catherine's graduate thesis. It was on the ethical distribution of private wealth. The margins were filled with her youthful notes. The arguments were sharp and compassionate. It was the intellectual seed of the ledgers. Eleanor included a note. She would want you to have this. The student became the master. I held the thesis carefully. It was another piece of the puzzle. It showed the deliberate evolution of a life's philosophy. I donated it to the Historical Society with a digital copy for the Foundation. It belonged to the public record now. Summer turned to fall. I took a trip alone. I visited the lakefront apartment where Catherine lived. The new owners allowed me to see it. They were a young family. They knew the history of the previous owner. They had read Rebecca's articles. They had hung a small photo of Catherine in the hallway. They said it felt right. The apartment was full of children's toys and laughter now. Catherine's sparse space was gone, but her presence was honored. I stood at the window, looking at the lake view she saw every day. I understood her solitude differently now. It was not loneliness. It was the clearing necessary for deep thought, for listening to the world's needs without distraction. I thanked the family and left. I drove home feeling a circle had closed. I had seen the beginning and the end of her physical journey, and I had helped midwife the continuation of her work. That was a privilege beyond measure. The holidays approached again. This year, we started a new tradition. Sophie, James, his girlfriend Clara, and I had dinner together. It was slightly awkward, but filled with goodwill. We focused on Sophie and her stories. It was a modern family, stitched together with respect. After dessert, Sophie brought out a gift for everyone. It was packets of sunflower seeds from her garden. She had saved them and decorated the packets herself. She gave one to James, one to Clara, one to me. "So we can all have the same garden," she said. It was a simple, profound gesture of unity. We all accepted the seeds with genuine gratitude. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat by my fireplace. I held the seed packet. It was a document of a different kind, a contract with the future, a promise of growth. I placed it on my mantel next to Sophie's clay pot. The house was quiet, but my heart was full. The new year dawned bright and cold. I had a meeting at the Historical Society. David had completed the first draft of Catherine's biography. He asked me to read it. I spent a week slowly going through the manuscript. It was meticulously researched and beautifully written. It wove together her family history, her intellect, and her secret work. It portrayed her not as a saint, but as a determined, flawed, brilliant woman. It was honest and therefore deeply respectful. I gave David my notes, all minor. He submitted it to a university press. It would be published the following year. The story would be preserved in the academic record. Another layer of legacy secured. My own writing continued. I started a longer project, a book about the psychology of documents, how wills, ledgers, and letters shape lives after death. I used Catherine's story as the central case study. The work was challenging and absorbing. It gave structure to my days. I still visited the community center often, but as a guest. I attended a lecture series there. I used the gym. I was a beneficiary of the place I helped build. That felt like a beautiful completion. One spring morning, Arthur Finch passed away in his sleep. It was peaceful in his cottage surrounded by roses. He was 92. His grandniece called me with the news. She said he had left instructions. A simple service in the estate's rose garden. He wanted me to say a few words. The service was small and sweet. The foundation board attended. The baker brought pastries. David read a poem. I stood and spoke about Arthur's quiet stewardship. I spoke about his belief in blooming. I said he was the unseen root of much beauty. People nodded through tears. He was buried in a nearby cemetery under a simple stone. It read Arthur Finch, he tended well. It was perfect. After the service, his grandniece gave me a small box. Arthur had left it for me. Inside was his caretaker's ring of keys. All the keys to the estate, the carriage house, the cottage, and a note. For the next caretaker of stories, you know where they live. I held the heavy key ring. I understood the metaphor. The stories were not just in documents. They were in the living community. I would be their caretaker now. I accepted the keys with a solemn heart. I walked to the carriage house one last time as a visitor. I used Arthur's key to open the door. The smell of paper and peace greeted me. I sat at the desk. I looked at the shelves, now perfectly ordered. My work here was truly done. But the carriage house would remain. It would be a study space for scholars of philanthropy. I locked the door behind me. I kept the key. I drove to the Grove. I walked into the community center. The metalwork map gleamed in the lobby. I saw Lena speaking with a group of teenagers. She waved. I waved back. I walked through to the garden. Sophie's sunflowers were just pushing through the soil. The cycle was beginning again. I sat on a bench and watched. A young mother pushed a stroller nearby. An old man fed birds. Life, ordinary and precious, unfolded here. This was Catherine's final ledger entry. It was not written in ink. It was written in bricks and mortar and growing things. It was written in the quiet hum of a place that belonged to everyone. I took a deep, contented breath. The story was no longer about a divorce or a box or a foundation. It was about the endless, renewable human capacity to begin again, to offer a second chance, to tend an unseen garden. The sun was warm on my face. I closed my eyes and listened. I heard the sound of a community, living,